The Carpenter and the Cradle, a History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 8. When Coe's head finally emerged, his lungs demanding air insistently, it seemed half of his lifetime had been spent under the water in those few moments. He'd been so intent on making the best possible distance he could on the one deep breath he'd managed before hitting the water, that he only noticed when his head was above water that the rope on his wrists had loosened. He rolled over onto his back and gave his hands a powerful tug. He felt another strand give way. Ha! He thought. They're not much at making ropes. They must use some kind of fiber that breaks down in water. He kept working at his bonds until the cord gave way entirely and his hands were free. Bliss! To be able to bring his hands around from behind his back. He never knew how he'd taken such a privilege for granted all his life up until such a short time ago. His feet proved to be more difficult to free. The knots must have been tied tighter and more rounds of rope used. But it didn't matter. He could swim with just his hands and kick his feet together for propulsion. He wasn't sure how far he'd need to swim to be out of range of danger. He swam till he was sure the men couldn't possibly track him so far. And then he added more distance for good measure. After all, swimming with the river, the swimming was easy, and now that his body had adjusted to the shock of the cold water, he was almost enjoying himself. Not quite like going for a dip for fun with Qua, or Hetot, or Beatty, but the relief of having evaded his captors made Coe almost giddy with delight. What did he care if the water was a little cold? But if he went any farther, he'd be out of the river that he knew well and could be facing rapids. He'd better find his way out while he could. Finally, he swam hard to get out of the current and into the shallower water of the river's edge. With his hands, he pulled himself out onto the sloping rocky bank, and now that he could use his hands and the thin pointed end of a rock, made short work of the knots keeping the cords around his ankles. He was free. He stilled his breathing and listened, all his senses alert for signs of danger. But only the soothing sounds of the river and a light breeze stirring in the tall cottonwoods along the riverside found his listening ears. June tried to wipe the shocked look off her face after Georgie's revelation. Why would she believe it was her stepfather who was driving the hit-and-run car? She didn't want Georgie to think she didn't believe her, but she wanted to understand why Georgie was so sure, and why her stepfather would want to kill her. "So that's who you're scared of?" June asked. "Yes, and it's not the first time he's tried to kill me, but he's a well-respected member of our community back home. Everyone thinks he's just about perfect. He's always volunteering for this and that, and making himself look like a great guy. No one would believe me if I told them. And even if it went to court, it would be my word against his. He's been spreading the word and acting all concerned for me, talking to a therapist and so forth about getting some treatment for my mental breakdown. He's been saying I've been growing withdrawn and unstable after my mum died. I think he's trying to make me look crazy, like he's setting the stage for me to try telling anyone anything and looking like a complete liar if I do." "He's tried to kill you before? What did he do?" "Well, this is the thing. He always makes it look like an accident, so although I'm sure he's trying to kill me, and I'm sure it's him, there's not really anything I can tell anyone. Like, just recently, the hit and run, I only caught a quick look, and the man driving had facial hair, which my stepfather's never had before, but of course he could grow some to hide his face. And he was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled down low, and a hoodie with the hood up. And the car wasn't his, of course, probably rented, so I'd have no way of proving it was him. But I'm sure it was him all the same. Who else would it have been? Who else would be trying to kill me? And the driver was certainly trying to kill me, I know that much. There's been 2 other times he tried. The first time I wasn't sure, but with everything else that's happened now I am sure. The first time a beam nearly came and landed on me when I was visiting his work site. He's a construction foreman. Anyway, he'd asked me to bring him his lunch that he'd forgotten, or so he said. I went to the site and was calling for him. No one seemed to be around, with it being lunch hour. For some reason, I looked up just in time to see the beam coming for me, and I jumped out of the way. I just had an impression that I saw someone disappearing around the other side of the wall of the top story where the beam came from. I wasn't sure, though, and I couldn't believe it would be my stepfather because I thought we'd always gotten along pretty well, so I told myself I imagined it and was just an accident. What was the second time? Breathless June jumped in when Georgie stopped momentarily. We had a walk-in freezer at our house because of the catering business my mum ran. Well, he asked me to get something. I went in and the door slammed shut behind me, which is not a big deal because there's a kind of a push handle on the inside. But when I tried it, it wouldn't open. I only got out of that one alive because I banged on the door and shouted till I was hoarse. Before I actually froze to death, a neighbor heard me. She'd stopped in returning something or other, I forget what, and she heard my shouting. She tried to get me out, but the door was jammed somehow. She had to go find my stepdad. He'd gone out to the shops. He came back and fixed the door and got me out. He had to, with the neighbor watching. Of course he claimed the door must have just jammed on its own, but I was examining it later, and it sure looked to me like it had been broken purposely. And then, of course, there was the hit and run. That, I know, I didn't imagine, and obviously it had to have been a murder attempt, even if I can't prove who was driving the car. So I can't prove anything, but don't you think 3 things that could have killed me within about the space of 6 months is just a little too much to be believed? And the only one who could have done them all is my stepfather. But Georgie, what about your mum? June asked. She died last year, Georgie said brusquely. Oh, you don't think, do you? No, it was cancer. Oh, I see. I mean, I'm sorry, but at least... Yeah, I know. And your dad? He died too. That's why my mum remarried, and I'm an only child. I have no grandparents, aunts or uncles or cousins. My grandparents have all passed. My dad was an only child. My mum had 2 sisters, but they both died of cancer too. They were a lot older than my mum, and neither one of them ever got married or had kids. So my stepdad is really the only family I have, and I can't go back to live with him. I wouldn't live long. I'm convinced of it. But why, Georgie? Why would he want to kill you? Georgie paused for a long moment. I'm not sure yet. I have a guess, but I'm not ready to talk about it. I'm trying to figure things out. That's why I came to Beaver Row when I ran away. And the fact that I think he knew where I was going tells me that my guess is right. But I still have some investigating to do, and none of this was what I came here to tell you. I have to ask for your help again. Of course, Georgie, July said. If there's anything we can do, June added. Well, the problem is, the place I'd found to camp out in isn't going to work for me anymore. I need to find somewhere else, or get on the move again. I'm sure my stepfather knows by now that I didn't die in that hit and run, so maybe I should keep moving. July went to give June an elbow again, but June blocked her in time with an elbow of her own. She knew July meant the elbow to say, "See, I told you she was staying in the old cherry barn." Now that new people were turning it into a house, she'd need somewhere else to stay. June took a chance and said to Georgie, "Were you staying at that old cherry barn? That's what we all call that big old barn, one property over. We know some people are trying to renovate it to turn it into a house." Georgie looked crestfallen. "So you knew. Yes, that's where I'd spotted to stay, and I can't anymore. Anyway, I wasn't going to ask you to find a place for me. I'll figure something out. But I may need to ask you for those winter things you were going to find for me now already, because I don't know how much more I'll be seeing of you, especially if I have to leave town now. I don't have anyone else I can ask, but I'll need the things before fall hits." "Of course, we can round you up a coat and boots and warmer blankets and clothes. But Georgie, please don't leave. At least in Beaver Row you have June and I to help you. You know what I'm thinking? I just remembered that Fern Mann, you remember Fern, you met her in the hospital, and I think she's been to Lady Cromarty's to visit you with us when you lived there. Anyway, her family has an old storage shed on one of their rental properties. The property isn't being rented right now. They don't even keep the shed locked because it's pretty much empty, and I don't think anyone bothers it anymore. Fern's sort of a neighbor too. Well, kind of a distant neighbor, so you wouldn't be that far away. We can ask her if you can stay there. Obviously, we can't ask her parents, but at least she could look out for you if you stayed there, and we'd keep on helping you out too," June volunteered. Georgie gave one of her expressive shrugs. "I suppose. I don't know what else to do. Worth a try, I guess." Then she added hastily, "And thank you, I do appreciate all you're doing for me." "We can't just leave you in danger, that's for sure. Whatever we have to do, we'll do it," July said firmly.